comment I heard from a mutual friend of ours. He once said, "This guy, he was you were a really tough individual. Like you used to like just through force, you used to get things done." So walk us a little bit on everything you mentioned right now. So on the usually when people think about the journey, everybody thinks of the journey of like how they made it to a certain status, right? So for you, it sounds to me like at one point you were was it were you a police officer first, then got into politics? So how did that even happen? Or were
No,
you a realtor at the time too, or that comes after?
no, I wasn't a realtor at the time. I actually, you know, dabbled in street gangs. I got bullied in eighth grade,
Okay.
and we were living out in Bell Huntington Park area. We'd moved from Compton, kind of stepped up a little bit, moved into that area, and then my parents finally bought a home in La Puente in 1987. I remember prior to moving, I started to get bullied by this one kid in eighth grade. And I freaking knew I could take him. If I find him today, I'm just gonna punch him in the face um, just to,
It's
you
old
know,
tie six.
just for old time's sake. There you go. I need to watch my language. But that journey sparked something different because then I moved over to La Puente and I just kind of made that choice. I made a conscientious choice without even realizing it that I was never going to get bullied again. And from that point forward, that kind of opened myself up into a life of gangs and so forth because I definitely wasn't athletic. So why you grew up in La Puente, you were either an athlete or you were a fucking cholo. So let's just call it what it is. And
Right.
so I ended up falling into that, and then that started a whole life of chaos. And but from there, along the way, realizing that that's not something I wanted by choice, but it's something that just presented itself as a way to protect myself. Um, and along the way, just you know, still wanting to find another avenue towards things, and um, I got into politics because of unions. I ended up working for the school district. Got out of that. Ended up working in the school district. Ended up working for the school police for Walnut Valley Unified, and then got involved with the union. So I was like not even 21. I was already the president of the union, and flying to conferences and learning about mediation and all these different things. And from there is how I actually got my start on the police commission in the city, and then eventually to the planning commission, and then eventually to the city council, and so forth. So yeah, kind of a crazy journey,
So, so I've always found it really interesting that people that are into gangs or they get involved in that sometimes, right? They do end up getting into law enforcement. To me, that's always been really interesting to see because then you have the most common thing, which is they just completely destroy their lives, right? They don't get out of that environment. How did you make it from being involved with the wrong people to then start searching the police force or I mean, how do you go from that to that?
Well, when I prior to getting into starting to dabble into gangs, I had become a police explorer. So I never really wanted that choice of wanting to get mixed up in that, but it was more from a place of safety and security. And
Mm,
it was, I didn't want to be bullied. I didn't want to be that kid that was picked on, and I wasn't a jock. So that was my only alternative. So my mindset was always to go into law enforcement, was always to become a police officer. So
got it.
once I was able to exit away from that, I got back. So it's almost like I went off the path of my journey,
Mhm.
but then I was able to redirect myself back once I was able to get away from the environment.
And was there someone that helped you get out of that environment?
Um, you know, I think honestly, it was me that helped myself.
Okay.
I mean, definitely the love of my mother not wanting to, starting to see me go in that direction, and really, I guess at times she really didn't understand what was going on.
Hmm.
But then when she started to see that, there was something happening, her starting to push me back and not wanting me to continue in that lifestyle. And then actually, when I got expelled out of La Puente High School and had to go to schools up in Whittier, um, there was a counselor at the school that we started talking, and then she got to know me. And her husband was actually the coordinator for the Explore program for the sheriff's department out in Norwalk. And so I thought like I was done because of, just, my past. But they gave me a shot and gave me an opportunity, and I was able to connect back in with the Explorer, which is a Sheriff's Explorer program and so forth, and get back on track. So it's almost like I had a hiccup for 2, 3 years, and then I was just able to get back on my track and continue where I left off.
So you joined law enforcement. So you're a police officer. For how long were you doing that?
So I got hired when I was 18, 19 as
Mm,
a reserve police officer for LAPD.
okay.
Um, Also working for the school district, and then eventually got hired as a school police officer also.
Mm.
So I was now not even old enough to drink, and I was already going through the academy and so forth. So
And you're seeing it's interesting because you're the school police, so you're looking at other kids as well going through their struggles, and then you also get to see it from a different perspective, I'm guessing, right? Because now you're on the other side. You probably got to see people get bullied, or people that they were going through struggles as a kid, right? When you're in that space.
it gave me empathy. It gave
Mm.
me empathy, and it gave me understanding. So I honestly feel that some of the best counselors, police officers, firefighters, doctors are ones that have gone through the struggle. A doctor can sit here and go and get educated and learn all about medicine, but unless they've gone through the struggles of having to battle some chronic disease or some ups and downs, they don't truly understand the dynamics. I mean, you can get the textbook smarts. Same thing with an addict. You can have an addict that. Well, let me go back. You can have someone that goes and becomes an expert, a therapist, and wants to help addicts and so forth. And yes, you can approach it from an academic standpoint, but the real medicine comes from an addict that actually was able to overcome that and heal themselves from that, and knows the struggles, knows the cravings and so forth. So I just think that sometimes, well, I think a lot of times some of the best teachers are the ones that actually walked in those shoes, walked in those fires and so forth. And
You get
so
to
coming
experience.
from into law enforcement background, I saw the hurt and pain of these kids. You think of a gang member and you think, oh, they're pieces of shit. Oh, they're low lives, but you don't know their stories behind them. You don't know that. I would say that most of them chose that as their family because they didn't have family. They were surrounded by parents that were drug addicts or that were involved in the gang, or they were neglected or abused. So people don't wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to join a fucking gang. No, they wake up because they're looking for community, looking for their tribe. They're looking for protection. They're looking for a voice.
And then not only that, but as kids, everyone, you could say we're all vulnerable. When you're a child, you don't really have a lot of decisions for you to make that are either good or bad. It just depends whatever you have in front of you. That's a survival mechanism for a lot of people. So 100%, no, that makes sense. So then, okay, so then you're in the police force. Then you start getting into politics. How was that transition? I mean, for your professional career, and also seeing things from a, because it sounds to me like everything that you were trying to do was always just provide some sort of support, help, and be there for people. That's at least what I'm hearing, right? Because you go from police force now into politics. Well, how was that experience?
It was an amazing experience. A lot of times people said I wore my heart on my sleeve because I
Mm.
was fighting, always fighting for the underprivileged. I was always fighting for the people that didn't have a voice. So, I remember in politics always ruffling feathers and really shaking things up, fighting with Gloria Molina, who was a county supervisor, or the local senators, because I was actually at one time for gang injunctions and they were against it. I was about beautification and using the money to help the residents as opposed to putting it in some bullshit programs that weren't going to touch the residents. So I instrumented, I honestly feel that one of my biggest accomplishments when I was on city council was being able to start the conversations about creating a youth community center, which finally got built about 2 years after I left. But it was something that was never on the table, but just giving the youth a place where they could go and they could learn and have computers and games and activities. So that, in addition to how we tackle the gangs and crime and so forth. So um, I guess the answer to your question is I was a voice of the people, and I wasn't intimidated by the infrastructure or the powers that be that were in power. No, I came in with an agenda of what did the people want, and I would have community meetings. I would set up a booth outside of a market and talk to people, and so I built a lot of support from the football boosters, the PTAs, the little leagues, because they never had a voice. Especially in local politics. We go, we knock on your door, we beg for your vote, and then you disappear. No, I was still out there talking to people. I was still out there keeping a pulse on what was going on in the community.